It started with a thud against my front door. No knock, just the hollow slap of paper against wood. I opened it to find a single envelope, sealed in that self-righteous beige color HOA seemed to love. The header read, "Notice of non-compliance, the offense, unapproved elevated structure in rear yard. Translation, my 8-year-old son's treehouse." It wasn't a mansion in the sky, just plywood, safe rails, a small deck with a rope pulley. My son called it mission control. We built it together over 2 weekends, with bolts that could hold a truck and a permit from the city inspector himself. But apparently, the HOA board decided the treehouse altered the aesthetic harmony of the community. That phrase, aesthetic harmony, made my teeth grind. The signature at the bottom belonged to Margaret Hensley, our HOA president. The neighborhood called her Mailbox Maggie because she once fined a family for having the wrong shade of black on their mailbox. I knew then this wasn't about wood and nails. It was about control. The next morning, Maggie was already parked by my curb in her golf cart, clipboard in hand. She smiled like she'd just won a small war. "You'll need to dismantle that." "Contraption by Friday," she said. "You mean the treehouse?" I asked. "It violates Article 7. Section 3B, structures over 6 feet, require prior HOA approval. The city approved it. We're not the city." She drove off before I could reply, leaving a trail of smug behind her. That night, I stood in the backyard under the soft buzz of the motion light. My son's laughter still echoed faintly from earlier. The treehouse stood there like a promise. Clean angles, solid supports, his drawings taped inside the railing. I wasn't tearing it down. Not for her. So I went hunting for the paper trail. The HOA's bylaws hadn't been updated since 2014, and I had a copy. Section 3B didn't even mention elevated structures, just permanent additions. Ours was bolted, not cemented. That mattered. I scanned the letter, the photos Maggie had taken, even the timestamp metadata, 8:12 a.m. She'd trespassed into our yard before sunrise. I printed that out too. Evidence, then came the next move. Escalation. 2 days later, I got a second notice, this time stamped final warning. The HOA claimed I was in direct defiance of community governance and would face further action. A fine, a lien, maybe even court, so I called a friend, Tom, a real estate lawyer who'd handled HOA disputes before. I sent him every document, photo and timestamp. "You got them cornered," he said. "Section 3B doesn't apply. Plus, you've got proof she trespassed for the photos." "Hold the line," I held it. That weekend, I installed 2 new cameras, one on the side gate, one angled at the yard. Motion alerts, time logs, chain of custody clean as a whistle. And then, just when I thought Maggie had run out of threats, she showed up with backup. The architectural committee, clipboards in formation, inspecting like it was a crime scene. "We've received several complaints," she announced. "From who?" I asked. "Residents concerned about safety." "You mean people you called?" They didn't answer. Instead, one of them took photos while another measured the height. My son stood by my leg, clutching his model rocket, eyes wide. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the treehouse. This was about humiliation. That night, I checked the community email thread. Maggie had already posted a message. "We must preserve the safety and visual standards of Oakcrest Estates. Unauthorized constructions will not be tolerated." Comments rolled in. Most residents stayed quiet, but a few sided with her. One name caught my eye. Councilman Dean Avery, yes, the mayor's brother. His message? "I support the HOA's authority to enforce community order." I smiled at the irony. Because just 2 weeks later, the mayor's own family would move into our neighborhood, and his son would set foot in that very treehouse. But that part hadn't happened yet. For now, Maggie was building her case, and I was building mine. I printed everything, labeled each page, and created a file. HOA versus treehouse. Timeline. Correspondence, photos, citations. Maggie thought she could bully her dad into folding. But I don't fold. I document. Next came the HOA meeting where she planned to address the non-compliant structure. What she didn't know was that I'd invited a few people of my own. The HOA clubhouse smelled like burnt coffee and fresh power. Folding chairs in perfect rows, fluorescent hum above, the American flag drooping in the corner. I took a seat in the back, file in hand, calm as a chess player mid-match. Maggie sat at the front table, flanked by her loyal board, 3 retirees who nodded whenever she did. A gavel rested under her palm like a loaded weapon. "We'll begin with item 4B, she said, tapping the mic. "Unauthorized elevated structure at lot 32. That was me. The slideshow flickered on the projector, photos of my backyard, my son's treehouse, even one of me standing beside it, taken through the fence. I felt the room tighten. "As you can see," Maggie continued, "this structure exceeds the permitted height and poses a potential liability to the association." She turned the word liability like a knife. I waited until she finished her little performance, then stood. "May I respond?" "Briefly," she said. "We're limited on time." I carried my folder to the front, slow and steady. Every step echoed. "According to Article 7, Section 3B, I began, only permanent structures require HOA approval. The treehouse is bolted, not anchored. Temporary by definition. I also have a letter from the city inspector, approving it for residential use." Murmurs in the room. Someone whispered, "He got it inspected." I laid out photos, inspection reports, and, just for flavor, a printout showing the metadata on her original complaint photos. And these were taken at 8:12 a.m., 2 days before the notice. The HOA's own code prohibits entering private property without notice or consent. The silence that followed had weight. Maggie's smile stiffened. I was conducting a visual inspection from the easement. "That's interesting," I said, "because the photos include a close-up of the rear deck. The easement ends 15 feet before that." Someone coughed to hide a laugh. Her co-chair, Ron, cleared his throat. "Mr. Lawson, even if technicalities exist, the board maintains the right to enforce community standards." "Standards, sure," I said. "Selective enforcement?" No, that got a few raised eyebrows. See, I'd done my homework. That same committee had approved a pergola last year on lot 19, 6.5 feet tall, no vote, no fuss. The owner? Ron's daughter. I clicked the next slide on my USB drive, side-by-side photos, her pergola and my son's treehouse, both under the same section of the bylaws. Article 3B doesn't care who your daughter is. Ron. The room broke into quiet laughter, the kind that burns. Maggie's gavel hit the table. "Order, please." But the control was slipping. A few residents started whispering about double standards and abuse of authority. One even pulled out her phone and started recording. Then a new voice came from the doorway. "Calm, official. Sorry to interrupt," the man said. "Mayor Avery asked me to deliver these." Every head turned. The man handed Maggie a sealed envelope, city seal embossed on the flap. She opened it, eyes narrowing as she read. "What is this?" she snapped. "A clarification from the city," the man said. "Effective immediately. The inspection record for Lot 32 structure stands approved and compliant. No further municipal action is required." He nodded to me on the way out. The room buzzed. Maggie's control evaporated like mist. "Meeting adjourned," she muttered, voice sharp. But the residents weren't done. They swarmed her table, demanding explanations, quoting bylaws back at her. I slipped out quietly, file under my arm. I didn't need to gloat. I had confirmation, documentation, and momentum. But the real twist came 3 days later. A moving truck rolled down Oakcrest's main drive, big blue city issued. New family. And when I saw who stepped out, I almost laughed. Mayor Thomas Avery, smiling for the cameras, his son in tow, maybe 10 years old, curious and bright. They were moving into the vacant house 2 lots down. That boy spotted my son's treehouse within 5 minutes. By the next afternoon, both boys were up there, helmets on, playing astronauts. The mayor waved when I passed. "Great setup you've got," he said. "Reminds me of mine as a kid." I smiled. Glad someone appreciates it. Maggie watched from her porch like she'd bitten a lemon. She didn't know it yet. But her aesthetic harmony crusade was about to hit a wall, one with City Hall's letterhead, because when the mayor's son plays in the same treehouse you tried to ban, the rules suddenly start to look flexible. By the end of that week, Oakcrest Estates felt different. The same neighbors who'd once peeked from their blinds were now waving, smiling, even asking about lumber specs for their own backyard projects. Power shifts quietly, but once it starts you can hear it creak. The treehouse stood untouched, framed by fall leaves and vindication. Every afternoon, my son and the mayor's boy disappeared up the ladder, their laughter spilling over the fences Maggie once patrolled. That alone was poetic justice. But the backfire hadn't truly hit yet. It came during the next HOA board meeting. I didn't even plan to attend. But when my motion sensor pinged at 6:42 p.m., a black SUV idling outside my gate, I decided to take a walk. At the clubhouse, the lights were on, blinds half closed, voices sharp. Inside, Maggie sat across from a man in a tailored grey suit, the city's compliance officer. His briefcase was open, paperwork neatly stacked. "Ms. Hensley," he said evenly, "the mayor's office has received several complaints regarding your enforcement procedures, specifically selective application of Article 7. She stiffened. "Complaints from whom?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He slid a file across the table. Inside were screenshots from the HOA's own Facebook page, Maggie bragging about keeping standards high and correcting behavior with unapproved visits. There were timestamps, IP addresses, even her posts, tagging the mayor's family in thinly veiled digs about preferential treatment. Her face drained color. "Those were private comments," she whispered. "They're public record once posted on a community forum," he replied. "And your bylaws explicitly forbid using association resources to target individual members." I leaned against the doorway, quiet observer. It was everything I'd hoped for, and nothing I needed to say aloud. Then came the kicker. "Additionally," the officer continued, "due to verified trespass and data misuse, the city is suspending Oakcrest's enforcement privileges pending a formal review. You are not to issue any further citations without municipal oversight." You could have heard a leaf drop. Ron, the vice chair, blinked. "What does that mean for us?" "It means," the officer said, "that your HOA is temporarily stripped of autonomous authority." Translation: they'd lost their power. I caught Maggie's eye. For once, she didn't glare. She just looked tired, like she'd finally realized the paper crown she'd been wearing had burned. A week later, she resigned for health reasons. Ron followed. The board disbanded pending re-election. The compliance review would take months, maybe a year. In the meantime, Oakcrest felt freer than it had in a decade. That weekend, the mayor hosted a neighborhood picnic in the park. Kids played tag. My son showed off the treehouse to a line of new friends, explaining the pulley system like an engineer. When the mayor stopped by, he handed me a folded note, city letterhead again. "Consider this closure," he said. It was official confirmation that the inspection approval was permanent, and that the HOA had been found in violation of municipal procedure. He smiled. "You built something good for your kid. Sometimes rules forget what they're for." Later that night, when the yard was quiet and the cricket started up, I stood under that same oak. The boards above creaked softly as the boys packed up their toys for the night. Justice doesn't always come with sirens or speeches. Sometimes it's a slow correction, measured, documented, undeniable. I'd learned a few things from this mess. That bullies love bylaws until you quote them back. That documentation is stronger than outrage. And that even the loudest HOA can't outvote the truth. Before heading in, I stapled the original Notice of Non-Compliance inside the treehouse wall. My son asked why. "Because," I said, "every fortress needs its flag." He grinned and saluted. Now every time I walk past that oak, I think about boundaries. The literal kind in our yards and the invisible kind in our communities. Both need respect, but both need defending. If you've ever stood your ground against a petty rule or power-tripping board, you know the feeling. That quiet click when the balance finally resets. Drop your story in the comments. I read everyone.